Hey everybody, Jonathan Broadbent here. It is Thursday, December 7th. I am Jonathan Broadbent, and I'm your host of UnWoke.Academy. And boy, do we have some stuff to talk about today. So we're going to dive into the weeds a little bit with some extra, not fun, but stuff you need to know about proxy voting. I'm going to put it in a nutshell in easy to understand terms today and help everybody to know why it's important and why it's made to feel like some ominous, terrible thing. So if you invest somewhere, let's say you have a 401k or something, I get these all the time. This is one thick booklet. Hardly a day goes by I don't receive 1, 2, or 5 of these things. So this is like, what is this, about 2 pounds of paper. And these things are sent to me in these big, ominous looking big plastic sleeves or big envelope and stuff. And then there are these return address, these fancy looking envelopes. And then there are all these extra pages. And then there are fold up sheets with descriptions and all that stuff. And then there are these tear off slips and all that stuff. If I didn't work in finance, I will readily admit that this to me would seem like it looks like a mortgage closing. So they send this stuff, and I would not fault anybody for saying, what the heck, I've got a busy life. I can't sort through all of this stuff. It seems like it's really complicated, and I'm buried in paperwork, and it looks like a mortgage closing. So this, my fine friends, is what's called a voting packet for issues for some of the investments that you have. So here's the way that works. And I want to describe the scenario and the environment and some of the companies that work in this space about what the voting is and what it represents, and explain a few things kind of all at once. It's made to feel like it's sort of this ominous, really overly complicated thing, in my opinion, with the designed intention of getting people not to act. Because if it feels like some big thick pack you get in the mail, you're more likely to say, oh, I'm just going to leave the responsibility for voting on whatever the issues are to somebody else. So what do I mean by that? Every company has a board of directors and people that own the company, and they make decisions about how the company operates. And so they get together everything from staffing and hiring and firing to procedures and whether or not to expand or whether to ship their labor market overseas and hire from other countries, or keep labor in the US, or whatever. Every kind of issue there is, with rare exception, it all kind of goes through the board, and all major decisions have to be made by the owners and operators and the boards of the stakeholders in the company. If you're investing, even through a mutual fund, you, my fine friend, are a stakeholder. First and foremost, whatever comes of actions and whatever your understanding is resulting from this discussion today, I want you to take that with you. I want you to have the understanding that if you're investing in a company through a mutual fund, directly through an exchange traded fund, however it is, you have some ownership, even the publicly traded companies. So let me put a finer point on that. If you invest in a mutual fund and that mutual fund buys some stock in Target, let's say, if you're like me, you're probably avoiding Target right now and you don't want it as part of your portfolio. But let's just imagine for a moment that you're buying a mutual fund through your 401k, and that mutual fund is invested in Target. That means, my fine friend, that you own some shares of Target. That means that you have rights to decide on the behaviors and actions of Target. Ding, ding, ding. This is hopefully starting to make some sense now. You are able to impact, you collectively, all of you, us, all the however many millions of people own shares in that and that company, in this example, Target. And every once in a while, issues come up, and that company has to make decisions, and they have to give you the time and opportunity to provide feedback on whether you like the decision or don't like the decision. Hence, voting. Voting for some people that are rich and have the time, energy, money, and wherewithal to go and fly there, they might go to the shareholders meetings and sit there in person in a giant room. You've probably seen them from like Apple and IBM and some of the big companies. Sometimes, usually about once a year, they have a massive shareholder meeting and they have a whole bunch of things to vote on. And then you see the big shot, fancy people. Some of them have their private jets parked outside and everything. So those people all sit around in a room and they talk about these issues and decide how to vote. A lot of those people with big, big money that buy big, big influence in the really big globalist companies, this should come as no surprise to you now because you've been paying attention for the last several years. They lean left, very heavily left. So what does that have to do with you and your vote? Because if you're listening to this show, you're either one of my trolls. Welcome. I look forward to the next new hate that you send my way on social media. I look forward to exciting trolling. But if you're not one of my trolls and you're actually paying attention and don't want the doldrums of global social communism or whatever we call it, and the depravity and starvation that ensues, and the culture wars and identity politics and all that. Don't get me started. If you don't like all that stuff, then you're probably wondering, well, gosh, what do I do about my vote? Because it may be small, but we add up. And here's the thing that I think not many people really want you to know. But even those big shots, that big room full of people with their private jets and all that stuff, they may own millions of shares of some of these big companies because they have billions of dollars. And that room might represent billions of dollars of investment in that big globalist company. But in many instances, you collectively outnumber them. You can outvote them. They don't want you to know that. So these proxy votes get mailed out. You do have the opportunity, I think without exception. Actually, I don't know the rules about attending in person, but fair to assume you would have the right and the option of attending a shareholders meeting in person. But the expectation is if you're working and you got a couple $1,000 or something and you're invested in some mutual fund, you're probably not going to want to go and jump on a plane and go and get a hotel room and fly somewhere and sit in on this shareholders meeting. So you probably mailed one of these voting. It's called a proxy vote, where you can just mail in. You can read up, and usually there's a neat little synopsis. It says, it might say something like, the shareholder, the board is recommending that company X close all of our American plants and ship all manufacturing to this country that has cheap slave labor or something. Maybe it's something like it's. You can see I'm being a little facetious, but that is actually how that sort of thing happens. So you might get this vote, and there's a handy little envelope that's provided that allows you to seal it up and mail it back to the organization. And then they put it in a big stack, they scan it in, and then they tally the votes and decide, in that hypothetical example, whether or not to keep the manufacturing here in the US or ship it over and take advantage of slave labor in some cheap labor pool elsewhere. So there are a couple of ways that this happens. One is you may get these things directly, and if you do, again, I may be a little bit jaded in this because I've seen these for too many years, and I've seen the way that they're crafted, and I've seen the way that they're mailed. I believe that the idea of mailing you these big thick booklets with lots of extra paper and exhaustive detail is a way of kind of making you feel like the process of voting is overwhelming. And gosh, I probably wouldn't want to do that. So in these voting scenarios, there's a default that's set up. And it basically says for people who don't vote, the automatic assumption is that they're in agreement with the recommendations of the board. Hence, all the cloudy smoke and mirrors, big, thick pack, 2-pound mailing with all the paper and 206-page pamphlet and all this stuff. Because candidly, I do believe that the expectation and hope is that you fail to mail the thing back in again, and they're just left free to do whatever it is that they want. Hint, hint. Usually, that's more migrating to the left. It's marching over. It's the shareholders in the room. It's the no votes show up, very little counter voice to the objective of the leftist thing that they want to do. Because overwhelmingly, the left pays more, controls more money, and controls things like the media and the narrative, social media and platforms and web traffic and whatever, all that stuff. But there's another piece to know about. There is something called proxy voting. So in proxy voting, or actually, I should say there's a different piece to proxy voting. And the way that looks is there are firms out there that collect data and vote on behalf of shareholders of companies. So there are really two big main ones out there that collect this data, and they will report in connection to a shareholders meeting how they believe that the voting public feels about an issue. And so they are creating votes on your behalf. Guess what? Those proxy voting entities lean heavily left. What that means is we have this environment where and we've had it for decades now, there's very little opportunity or inclination to vote either for, I hate to say labor, but for American know-how and manufacturing, for Western values, all the things that we talk about with UnWoke. The UnWoke voice in the voting environment is non-existent or close to it. There are no, at least not that I'm aware of, there are no proxy voting facilities that manage on behalf of conservatives, that manage on behalf of people that want to vote their values, instead of abdicating that responsibility to people that pretend that they have values and morals. So, one of the things among all those pieces that we are puzzling together and trying to create for we the people, and I mean that globally, not just US. I know I use that term, it has sort of American roots to it, but looking at a lot of the stuff that's happening throughout Europe and the UK, in particular, Denmark, with all the cool stuff that they're doing, protesting back against the woke left push to shut down farming and agriculture, even within China. There are pockets within China that long for capitalism. Tough market to crack, and I don't see a lot of immediate opportunity and hope for them. Not yet. Fingers crossed, and I pray. But all over the world, there are what I call we the people, and those people, we the average citizens of whatever our nation happens to be, I think, are kind of globally waking up to the notion that our governments are not with us. Our governments, in many occasions, in many instances, they work against us. I thought I'd turned my ringer off. Sorry about that. So, in many occasions, in many instances, they work against us. So, when it comes to these types of decisions, and these are global also, and they have global implications, and they relate to different labor pools and labor markets, and the companies and individuals that own and control shares in those companies. So voting them wisely makes a lot of sense. And that brings me back to the point about creating infrastructure for we the people. The objective, and it'll take some doing, it'll take some time, and it'll take some specific intention, in addition to trying to create um, pro-capitalism markets, like you've heard me talk about unwoke investments as opposed to unwoke investing. Unwoke investing is a strategy and a belief system that we don't need to be all global social communism. But there are all kinds of things that we're working on developing within unwoke investments that give investment opportunities into small businesses, seed money for local mom and pop shop kind of places that represent the opportunity for revitalization of economy. It's a spectacular way of, instead of investing in those mega global corporatist banks and investment managers, of investing locally. It's difficult right now to find local small business enterprise and invest in it. But meanwhile, on that side of the equation, that small business enterprise is starving for capital, and small regional local banks are being crushed right now. They're being run out of business. It's a perfect environment for we the people to step in and create these avenues through which we can use our money through things like investment pools to seed fund and continue to provide working capital to those growing businesses. Imagine an environment where everything isn't some like six homogenous looking globalist businesses, and we have lots of choices in local restaurants. And near me, we've got a lot. The big thing is food, farm to table. I almost said food to table. Hopefully there is food on the table, farm to table. But there are all kinds of things. There are machine shops and there are body shops, and there are people developing stuff and making things all the time, and they need capital. But when it comes to the voting thing, that's another piece, and it's related. If we are to continue to invest in publicly traded companies, and however that investment looks, it could be you building an individual portfolio of individual issues, like buying and selling those stocks and bonds yourself. That's an option. It could be a mutual fund. It could be an exchange traded fund. Whatever it is and whatever it looks like, the plan long term is to build enough infrastructure that we have one of those proxy voting locations that caters to shareholder first fundamental values, that caters to Judeo-Christian principles, capitalism, and Western values. Until then, my suggestion is to, I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm asking it anyway because we have a country to save and we're at risk. When you get these big things, start digging through and take a look at what's in there. You may surprise yourself. And if you're lucky, I've seen some good ones, and I've seen some not so good ones, and I've seen some that are just terrible, and somebody should go and file a complaint or something. But dig in, and hopefully what you may see is a website where you can go. Sometimes there's even a QR code. Scan it with your phone and take a look at what the issue is and make a decision. I'm hesitant to say lean away from whatever the board recommendation is, but maybe lean against what the board recommendation is, because overwhelmingly, every time I look at these, I look at the issue and I look at the objective and I look at the recommendations of the board, and they just routinely, constantly seem harmful to everything except for just corporate greed and doing some really bad stuff to the economy, to small business in particular. These places, they are small business crushing. And that's part of how they've gotten to where they are. If you think about it, and I've actually used this analogy a few times recently, in our grandparents' era, when they lived in a community, it was very common to have a local pharmacist, and there was an accountant who was an independent sole practitioner, and there might be a doctor's office that you could go into, and there was a a tax advisor and a financial advisor. And all these people had small businesses. They weren't some part of some mega corp. But look at us now. Look where we've gotten to. It's really unfortunate. But if you're anywhere in the US, if you're talking about going to a pharmacy, the objective or the environment that you're in probably dictates that you have maybe three to choose from. And that's horrible. That takes money out of your community and sends it to some big globalist group. So now it's a lose-lose-lose situation. You have these globalist mega banks managing all our money, steering it into these globalist firms. The globalist firms use lots of lawyers and regulatory environment to crush small business. Then they're taking your money and they're killing your community, our communities, plural. Then they're creating an environment where the voting process continues to lean and steer further and further left and further into a regulatory nightmare. And the alternative is going to be kind of twofold. We're going to create some environments where we're able to fight back in the voting process and voting those shares that you own, that we own in our portfolios, things like 401ks. And we are also going to be creating that seed money, as I mentioned, for local organic small business. So the mom and pop types of shops. I don't mean organic like produce, although it could mean that. I mean just local small business in your community or somewhere around you. That is the dream, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in for another exciting episode of UnWoke.Academy. I'm your host, Jonathan Broadbent. Stay tuned for the next exciting episode.